The weapon wasn't what the Council expected. That was the first thing Arbiter Voss Island recorded in her official log. Not the battle, not the casualties, not the formal declaration of violation. Just that small, specific observation, written in the clipped notation of someone trying very hard to stay clinical about something that had disturbed her deeply. The weapon was not a weapon. She had been staring at it for 11 minutes before she wrote anything at all. It sat on the examination table in Bay 7 of the asterisk ascendancy threshold, sealed inside a containment field that was, as 3 separate engineering officers had now confirmed, completely unnecessary. The object posed no radiation threat, no chemical signature, no reactive compound, no discernible energy output. It was a notebook. Spiral-bound, slightly water-damaged along the lower right corner. The cover read in faded human script field notes, LT, Mara Voss, 14th Expeditionary. Voss Island had not yet opened it. She was not sure she wanted to. 14 months earlier, the resolution had passed with a majority so overwhelming it had briefly made the Council feel unified, which, in itself, should have been a warning sign. The Galactic Cooperative Council did not agree on things. Not easily. Not completely. The Vethara bloc voted against the Meridian Compact on principle. The Silenti Collective abstained from everything on philosophical grounds. The Dravik Union had not cast a unanimous vote since the Third Compression War, 400 years prior. But the Human Armament Prohibition Resolution passed 31-1. The single dissenting vote came from a junior delegate named Pelassian of the Caretaker Worlds, a species so recently inducted into the Council that most senior members hadn't yet memorized their homeworld's name. He had actually stood, which was considered theatrically excessive in council chambers, and said 7 words before sitting back down. You do not understand what you are banning. Nobody had followed up. The vote proceeded. The resolution passed. The language of the prohibition was specific. All weapons systems, munitions, propulsion-based destructive devices, and combat-designated technologies belonging to the human species were to be surrendered, catalogued, and either destroyed or placed into permanent council custody within 90 standard days. Humanity had been granted probationary member status following the Karen incident, a designation that came with observer rights, limited trade access, and essentially zero political leverage. They were, as Arbiter Voss Island had summarized in her own recommendation memo, not yet ready for the responsibilities of full membership. The humans had agreed to comply. That was mystery number 1. They had agreed too quickly, too completely. The Council had prepared for years of legal challenges, diplomatic delays, jurisdictional disputes. Humanity had a documented institutional reflex toward exactly that kind of procedural resistance. Their own historical record was thick with it. Instead, their delegate, a woman named Commander Sira Akafer, had reviewed the resolution, set down the document, and said, "We accept." No counterproposal, no sunset clause negotiation, no demand for security guarantees. Just "we accept." Arbiter Voss Island had flagged it in her notes. Compliance without negotiation from a species known for negotiating everything. She had not yet determined what it meant. The weapons were surrendered on schedule. All of them. The inventory was staggering, not in sophistication, because human weapons technology was considered mid-tier at best, but in quantity asterisk. The cataloging teams worked for 3 weeks. When the final manifest was compiled, it ran to 47,000 line items across every class of destructive technology the Council recognized. Not one item was missing. The verification was done twice. The seals were applied. The Council formally declared the resolution satisfied, and humanity officially became the first species in recorded cooperative history to voluntarily disarm without a single act of resistance. Delegate Akafer had accepted the certification document with a small, careful smile. Voss Island had noted the smile too. The second mystery arrived 8 weeks later, when the Dravik survey vessel *Criterion of Worth passed through the Hellos corridor, a contested transit lane that the Council had quietly allocated to human use as part of the compliance incentive package. The *Criterion's captain, a veteran named H. Roldas, had filed a brief anomaly report. Nothing alarming. Just a note that the human installation at Hellos Station appeared to have expanded significantly in the 6 weeks since his last transit. New structures, several additional docking clamps, an unusual quantity of small cargo ships cycling through. He had not thought it worth investigating. It was the kind of report that sat in a queue for 11 days before anyone read it. By then, there were 7 similar reports from 7 different transit corridors. Hellos wasn't the only station that had grown. What are they building? The question came from Senior Arbiter Thalkoven, and it arrived in Voss Island's office at 3:40 station time, which meant he had been awake thinking about it for long enough that he'd stopped caring about the hour. He was old, Thalkoven, old even by Vetharan standards, his crest faded to near white, his posture carrying the particular rigid dignity of someone who had spent decades being right about things and had started to wonder if the streak was ending. "I don't know," she said. "They surrendered everything, every cataloged item. Our verification teams were thorough." They were. So what are they building that requires that kind of shipping traffic? Voss Island turned the survey images on her desk screen. The Hellos expansion, the Meridian Waypoint cluster, the 3 new prefab structures at Oren's Belt. Infrastructure, she said, medical processing, agricultural support. They requested exemptions for civilian construction materials and we granted them. Everything they've moved is technically within compliance. Technically, Thalkoven repeated, and the words sat between them like something that needed to be carefully handled. "I've filed a formal watch request, full sensor coverage on all 6 installations." He was quiet for a moment. They're not going to start a war, Voss Island. They know they can't win one. They've seen what the Dravik fleet alone would do to their systems. Yes, she agreed, they know. She did not add what she was actually thinking, that a species which knew it couldn't win a war and still agreed to disarm without a single condition was either very wise or very frightening, and she couldn't yet determine which. The sensor coverage began 4 days later. The third mystery announced itself immediately. The human installations were full of people. Not soldiers, not engineers. The bioscan classifications were returning almost entirely civilian. Medical workers, educators, agricultural technicians, construction personnel, families, children. The demographics of the inhabitants matched no military or industrial profile the Council's analysis systems could recognize. Voss Island had stared at that data for a long time. "They're colonizing," one of her analysts said, "fast-tracking settlement, building permanent communities." "In a conflict zone," another said, because the Hellos corridor was not peaceful. It was contested by 3 separate species with overlapping territorial claims, and it had produced 6 armed skirmishes in the past decade alone. "Why?" the first analyst asked. Nobody answered. The data continued to come in. The human settlements were not fortified. They had no defensive perimeter weapons, no orbital platforms, no automated response systems. All of those had been surrendered. They had medical facilities 3 times larger than their population required. They had seed banks, extensive archival systems, communication arrays that punched well above what civilian infrastructure should need. And they were putting civilians into the most dangerous real estate in their reach. Voss Island looked at the sensor data for a long time. Then she pulled out a fresh notation sheet and wrote, in the careful script of someone documenting something they were sure they didn't understand yet. "They are not defending the stations. They are building something inside them that they consider more important than the people they are putting there." She underlined it. Then she looked at the word people and underlined that too, for a different reason. The Karen incident had been, depending on who was interpreting it, either a catastrophic human miscalculation or the most efficient act of asymmetric problem-solving the Council had seen in 2 centuries. Voss Island's official report called it the former. She privately believed the latter. The Karen system had contained 3 inhabited worlds under the protection of the Ranthai hegemony, a mid-tier council member with a long history of using protection as an administrative euphemism for resource extraction. The humans had no military alliance with the Karen population, no formal arrangement, no treaty obligation. They had simply arrived and stayed, and when the Ranthai fleet came to enforce a new taxation schedule that would have been economically fatal to the Karen, the humans had been their asterisk, not fighting, just present, with ships that happened to be positioned in ways that complicated any clean tactical approach, with communication arrays broadcasting on every frequency the Council monitored, with medical teams already embedded in the civilian population. The Ranthai had backed down. The Council had been furious. "You use civilian presence as a weapon," Senior Arbiter Thalkoven had said during the formal review. Commander Okafor had looked at him with an expression that was technically respectful, but contained something underneath it. "We provided humanitarian support to a population in crisis. We are very good at being present. You created a situation where the Ranthai could not act without harming civilians and triggering galactic media coverage of a council member species conducting collective punishment," Okafor had said. "Yes, that's correct. We were aware of that possibility." "That is a weapon," Thalkoven said. "What you used, that is a weapon." "Then I'm very confused about your definition," Okafor replied, "because our weapons manual doesn't have a chapter on medical tents and communication arrays." The Council had stripped them to probationary status and begun drafting the Prohibition Resolution by the following morning. The attack on Hello Station came 73 days into the weapons ban. It was not the Ranthai that was the first surprise. Verk Freehold, a non-council faction operating in the corridor's disputed middle zones, had been watching the human settlements expand with the specific interest of an entity that had long profited from instability in contested space. Stable, settled corridors were bad for the kind of business the Verk conducted. The human settlements were stable by design, their medical and agricultural infrastructure drawing local populations who had previously been transient and therefore exploitable. The Verk sent 6 gunships. Voss Island received the emergency burst from Hello Station's communication array at 2:11 station time, and she was awake and at her station by the time the second transmission arrived. She pulled up the sensor relay. 6 Verk gunships in assault configuration, weapons hot, closing on a station with, she checked the census again, 412 civilian inhabitants, no orbital defenses, no weapons systems of any kind. She reached for the emergency response authorization. Her hand stopped. The humans at Hello Station had already responded. She watched the sensor feed with the specific quality of attention that comes from witnessing something that doesn't parse. No weapons discharge, no defensive fire. The station's communication array had gone to maximum output. She could see the signal strength spike, and every frequency was broadcasting simultaneously. She pulled the translation cue. They were talking, not transmitting distress calls, not issuing warnings, talking to the Verk ships. A single human voice, steady and unhurried in 3 languages simultaneously. The Verk gunships decelerated. They did not fire. They held position for 9 minutes. Then they withdrew. Voss Island filed an immediate inquiry to the Hello Station commander, a Lieutenant Mara Voss. No relation, the universe sometimes having poor timing with surnames, requesting full documentation of the communication exchange. She received a brief reply within the hour. Full documentation forthcoming. Please note, the communication involved no threats, no military posturing, and no prohibited materials. We are happy to provide complete transcripts. The transcripts arrived the next day. They were 40 pages long. Voss Island read all 40 pages, then she read them again. They negotiated, her senior analyst said, reading over her shoulder. In 9 minutes, they talked 6 armed gunships into leaving. Read page 31, Voss Island said. The analyst read page 31. He was quiet for a moment. They offered the Verk a contract. Ongoing medical services, Voss Island said, pharmaceutical supply, access to their seed bank, agricultural consultation. She turned away from the screen. The Verk freehold operates in a region with endemic crop failures and a documented healthcare deficit. The humans knew that. They knew it before the gunships arrived. How did they know what the Verk needed? Voss Island thought about the communications arrays, the ones rated far above civilian necessity. They were listening, she said, for a long time to everyone. The analyst was quiet. They didn't turn away 6 gunships, Voss Island said slowly, working through it as she spoke. They converted them, in 9 minutes, because they already had what the Verk needed, positioned exactly where the Verk were most likely to cause problems. She looked back at the sensor logs, at the expanding stations, the seed banks, the medical facilities 3 times too large for the resident population. They built their so-called civilian infrastructure in contested zones, specifically because contested zones are where you find people who need things. She looked at her notation from weeks earlier. They are building something inside them that they consider more important than the people they are putting there. She had been wrong. The people were the thing they were building. I need to reopen the weapons prohibition file. Thalkoven looked up from his desk. He had the expression of someone who had been waiting for this conversation and had hoped it would take longer to arrive. On what grounds? On the grounds that I think we prohibited the wrong things. Voss Island sat down across from him without being invited, which told him something about where she was. We banned their weapons, kinetic systems, energy weapons, propulsion munitions, everything in our standard destructive technology taxonomy. We were very thorough. We were. Our taxonomy doesn't include the things they're actually using. Thalkoven set down his stylus. They're unarmed, Voss Island. They're asterisk unweaponed, she said. That is not the same thing. She pulled up the Hellos event on her screen. 6 Verk gunships, turned away in 9 minutes using communication infrastructure and prepositioned humanitarian resources. The Verk freehold is now in an active service agreement with the Hellos Station medical team. The Verk have also, incidentally, stopped raiding 3 of the 4 transit routes they previously targeted, because 2 of those routes are now economically preferable to raid for the Verk to have stable. That's commerce. That's a weapon, she said, borrowing Thalkoven's own word back to him with the precision of someone who'd been saving it. It just doesn't look like one, and we never banned it because it's not in our taxonomy, because no one in the history of the Council has apparently weaponized asterisk being useful to people. Thalkoven was quiet for a long moment. There's more, Voss Island said. Of course there is. She brought up the secondary analysis, the one her team had compiled over the past 3 weeks, cross-referencing the station expansion data with historical council conflict maps, the Hellos corridor, the Meridian Waypoint cluster, Orin's belt, the 6 new sites she'd added to the watch list in the past 2 weeks, all of which had been expanding at the same rate. She placed each point on the galactic map overlay. The pattern that appeared was not subtle. Every human settlement was positioned at a choke point. Every choke point had a documented history of factional conflict. Every factional conflict had a documented underlying resource or healthcare or agricultural deficit. Every deficit was now being addressed by the human settlement stationed there. The entire network was a weapon, purpose-built, deployed with precision, structured so that the entities most likely to cause instability in contested space were becoming dependent on human services to sustain their own populations. "They're building a dependency web," Thalkoven said. "It was not a question." "Across 31 systems," Voss Island said, "in 90 days, while we were cataloging their kinetic munitions." The silence between them was the specific silence of two intelligent beings, realizing they'd been watching a card trick, while the cards were never the point. "Akefer," Thalkoven said. "Yes." When she said "we accept," she had already. The first settlement construction contracts were signed 6 days before the prohibition vote, Voss Island said. "I checked. The legal review process for civilian infrastructure in probationary member territories takes 4 days minimum. They started the process 10 days before the vote. They knew we were going to ban their weapons. They may have ensured we would," she said quietly. "The Karen incident put their weapons under political scrutiny at a very useful moment. If you want the Council to look very closely at your guns, the most effective method is to use your guns in a way that makes everyone nervous." Thalkoven stared at her. "I think the Karen incident was designed to produce the prohibition resolution," she said. "I think they walked into that review knowing exactly what we would do. I think they wanted their weapons banned." The silence that followed was a different quality entirely. The notebook was the third mystery made physical. Lieutenant Mara Voss, the Hello Station commander, the one who'd talked down 6 gunships in 9 minutes, had been aboard the Asterisk Ascendancy threshold for 6 hours now, brought in at Voss Island's formal request for what the summons had called a procedural compliance review. She was 29 years old by human reckoning. She had the self-contained quality that Voss Island had observed in most humans placed in situations of significant power imbalance. Not aggressive, not fearful, just present in a way that took up more space than seemed warranted. The notebook had been found in her personal effects during the routine item screening. It had triggered 3 separate automated review flags, not because it was dangerous, but because the screening system had no classification category for it, and items that resist classification are by protocol flagged for arbiter review. Voss Island set it on the table between them. "Tell me about this." Lieutenant Voss looked at the notebook. Something moved behind her eyes. "It's my field notes," she said. "From what field?" "From wherever I've been. I'd like to know what's in it." The lieutenant looked at her for a moment. Then she reached forward, picked up the notebook, and opened it to the first page. She turned it so Voss Island could read. It was a list. Names, species, locations, dates. Hundreds of entries written in a small, careful hand. Next to each entry, a brief notation. Water purification installed. Crop variant delivered. Medical consultation completed. Conflict mediation 4.5 hours successful. Child treated, full recovery. On and on. Pages of it. Each entry a small, specific, completed thing. "This is your weapons file," Voss Island said. Mara Voss didn't answer right away. She looked at the notebook. "When I was 8 years old," she said, "a relief worker came to my neighborhood. We'd had a bad year, flooding, infrastructure failure, the kind of thing that happens to places that don't have political leverage. He was from an NGO. He had medical supplies and water filtration units and 3 weeks of food aid." She looked up. "He had a notebook just like this. He showed it to me. He said, every person in this book is still alive because someone showed up. He said that's the only weapon that matters." She paused. "He gave me a blank one." Voss Island looked at the pages. Hundreds of entries, years of them. "You've been doing this your whole career," she said. "The whole team has. Every person at every station we run, they all keep one." Mara Voss closed the notebook gently. "You banned our guns, you didn't ban our notebooks." "We didn't know to," Voss Island said. "No," the lieutenant said, and there was nothing unkind in her voice, just a kind of careful honesty. You didn't. The council emergency session was called without a standard preparation period, which had not happened in 40 years. Voss Island presented for 90 minutes. She showed the network maps, the dependency analysis, the Karen incident reconstruction, the Hellos event transcript, the timeline of construction contracts predating the prohibition vote. She showed the notebook last. The chamber was quiet in the way that large bodies of powerful entities become quiet when they are processing the realization that they have made a significant mistake and are trying to determine how significant. They are in violation of the spirit of the prohibition, said the Ranthite delegate, which was either brave or deeply ironic coming from him. The prohibition, Voss Island said, with more patience than she felt, specified destructive technologies. None of their current activities employ destructive technologies. They are, by every legal standard we established, in full compliance. Then we must revise the prohibition. To ban what? She pulled up the network map again. Seed banks, medical facilities, communication arrays, agricultural consultation. If we ban those things, we are formally declaring that the Council prohibits its member species from providing food and health care to unstable regions. She let that sit for a moment. I'd like someone to help me draft that resolution. I'm curious to see what it looks like written out. Another silence. They are changing the political landscape of 31 systems, the Dravik delegate said. The Dravik were usually the ones who could be counted on to see clearly when they needed to, because they'd built their civilization on strategic thinking, and they recognized a strategy when they watched one unfold. Not with force, with necessity. Every faction currently in a service relationship with a human settlement now has a structural reason to maintain stability in the zones those settlements occupy. Every conflict that would previously have drawn in council resources to manage is being preemptively resolved through economic dependency. They are pacifying contested space by becoming indispensable to it. Yes, Voss Island said, without firing a single shot. They don't need to fire shots, she said. They need people to need them, and they are exceptionally good at identifying what people need and positioning themselves to provide it before anyone else thinks to. How long before the dependency web covers the full contested rim? The Dravik delegate asked. Voss Island pulled up her team's projection models. The number she showed them produced a silence that lasted for nearly 40 seconds. 4 years, she said, at current expansion rate, give or take 3 months depending on how much we obstruct them. 4 years, someone repeated. If we try to obstruct them, she added, the factions currently in service relationships with human settlements will object, loudly. Some of them have significant military capability. We'd be picking fights with entities we've been trying to stabilize for decades, on behalf of a position that will read publicly as the Council attempted to prevent medical care from reaching populations in need. She closed the projection. I'm not recommending obstruction. What are you recommending? Thalkoven asked. She looked at him for a long moment. I'm recommending we figure out what they actually want, because I don't think it's the rim. I think the rim is a means, not an end, and I'm deeply concerned about what the end looks like. Akafor met her in a neutral room on the station's diplomatic tier. No recording was requested, which meant both parties understood that whatever was said here existed outside the official framework. That was fine. Voss Island had stopped caring about the official framework approximately 2 days ago. You engineered the Karen incident, Voss Island said, not an accusation, a hypothesis being tested. Akafor, to her credit, didn't insult either of them by denying it. We identified an opportunity. To lose your weapons. To lose our guns, Akafor said. The Council has a very specific definition of weapons. We were aware of that when we signed the taxonomy agreement during probationary accession. We suggested several additions to the taxonomy at the time. The Council declined to incorporate them. Voss Island absorbed that. You told us what to ban. We made recommendations, Akafor said carefully. The council exercised its discretion. What did you recommend banning that we didn't? Akafor looked at her for a moment. Knowledge transfer systems, communication infrastructure rated above civilian necessity, prepositioned logistical networks, long-duration presence operations. She paused. Notebooks. Voss Island stared at her. You told us to ban notebooks. We said that human operational doctrine incorporated written knowledge accumulation and iterative learning systems as primary force multiplication tools, and that any prohibition not covering those systems would be structurally incomplete. Akafor's voice was entirely level. The Council's review panel said, and I'm quoting from the record, that a prohibition on note-taking was not a coherent legal concept and could not be incorporated into a weapons ban. The thing about the notebook on the examination table, the screening system that couldn't classify it, the 3 automated flags it had raised because the system had no category for something that wasn't dangerous but wasn't nothing either. We told you, Akafor said quietly. We were honest about it. We told you exactly what we were doing and how we were doing it and why a ban on guns alone would not accomplish what you wanted to accomplish. And you told us you were satisfied with the ban on guns. Because we didn't believe, Voss Island stopped. Because you didn't believe a notebook was a weapon, Akafor said. I understand, most species don't. It's a very human idea, that the most powerful thing in a conflict isn't what you can destroy, it's what you know about what other people need and how fast you can get it to them and whether they'll trust you when you do. She looked at her hands. We've been in conflicts before, internally. For most of our history, we fought each other for a very long time using very good guns. It did not go well. Eventually, we figured out that the side that wins is the side that the most people want to win, not because they're stronger, because they showed up when it mattered and they kept records and they came back. Your whole strategy, Voss Island said, working through it again, needing to say it out loud. The Karen incident, the instant compliance, the settlements, the service agreements, everything. This was all designed to get the Council to remove your guns so you could build the network without us classifying it as a military operation. If we'd kept our guns and built the network, Akafor said, you'd have called it a covert military expansion and responded accordingly. We'd have had to defend our stations against Council interdiction, which would have forced us to use the guns, which would have confirmed your worst assumptions about us. She looked up. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is put down the thing that's making everyone afraid of you, so they stop watching the thing you put down. The thing you put down. 6 gunships turned away in 9 minutes. A notebook. Hundreds of names, each one still alive. What do you want? Voss Island asked. In the end, what is this for? Akafor was quiet for a moment, then she said, full membership. That was it, that was all, 2 words. Full membership, Voss Island repeated. Full voting rights, full legal standing, full access to Council resources and frameworks for conflict resolution. Akafor's voice was steady and unperformative. We've been doing this work in contested space for 4 years, with no institutional support, no legal protection, no right to petition the Council if something goes wrong. Our people at those stations, Mara's people, the ones doing this every day, they have no rights under Council law. They're probationary. If a faction decides to stop honoring the service agreement and attacks a station, we have no legal recourse. We can't file a complaint. We can't request intervention. We're not members. She paused. We're trying to stabilize 31 systems for a Council that has told us formally that we're not trustworthy enough to have a vote. Voss Island thought about the 412 people at Hello Station. Families, children, placed there with no legal protection, no defensive weapons, no orbital platforms, just a communication array and 40 pages of recorded relationships and a lieutenant with a notebook. You put civilians into active conflict zones with no protection, she said. We put people who believe in what we're doing into places where what we're doing matters, Akafor said. There's a difference, and none of them went who didn't choose to. She looked directly at Voss Island. Do you know what the waiting list for a station assignment is? We've had to turn people away. We can't build fast enough. Why? Voss Island said. Why do they volunteer for that with no protection, no weapons, in some of the most dangerous? Because they keep a notebook, Akafor said simply, and they want more names in it. The second emergency session lasted 11 hours. Voss Island was the one who presented the membership motion. It was not the outcome she had expected when she'd first looked at the sensor flags on the Hello's expansion. It was not the outcome she would have predicted in any of the 11 months she'd spent monitoring the human settlements with growing unease. But she had read 40 pages of transcripts. She had held a water-damaged notebook. She had looked at a map of 31 systems where factional violence was measurably, demonstrably declining at a rate that the Council's own conflict management frameworks had failed to produce in 4 decades. She had also talked to Junior Delegate Pelassian of the Caretaker Worlds, who had cast the single dissenting vote 14 months ago. You knew, she said. We'd encountered them before, he said, during our accession period. One of their stations was near our contested border. They helped us. He was quiet for a moment. They kept records about us, hundreds of entries. They knew things about our communities that our own government had stopped tracking. They came back every time, even when it wasn't convenient. 7 words, she said. You don't understand what you are banning. He nodded. I thought it was worth saying, even if nobody listened. The vote was 28-4. The 4 dissenting votes were the Ranthai, 2 members of the Meridian Compact, and an abstention from the Silenti Collective that everyone chose to interpret charitably. Humanity received full membership in the Galactic Cooperative Council on the same day. The weapons prohibition was formally rescinded. They did not reinstate their military. Not all of it, not immediately. What they reinstated first was the communications infrastructure rating above civilian necessity. Then, the knowledge transfer protocols. Then, the prepositioned logistical frameworks. Then they opened a new registry for the Field Notes program, this time under full council recognition, with legal standing and formal protection. The registry received 1,400 applications in its first week. From humans, yes, but also from 3 other species who had been watching the network expand and had started to understand what it was. Voss Island received a package 3 weeks after the vote. Inside was a notebook, blank, spiral-bound. The cover had a small hand-written note from Lieutenant Mara Voss that said, "Every page is a weapon. Fill it with the right things." She sat with it for a long time. She thought about the moment she'd watched 6 gunships stand down, the 40 pages, the hundreds of names, the patients treated and the crop failures averted, and the conflicts that had simply failed to escalate because someone had shown up and kept coming back. She opened the notebook to the first page and wrote, Day 1. Then she looked at the blank pages ahead of her. She wrote a name. The Galactic Cooperative Council would later debate, in its academic forums and its policy chambers and its historical retrospectives, the exact moment humans had changed the architecture of the galaxy. Some pointed to the Karen incident. Some pointed to the Hellos event. Some pointed to the vote itself. Voss Island, when asked, always gave the same answer. She said it happened in Bay 7 of the Asterisk Ascendancy Threshold Asterisk, at 3:40 station time, when she looked at a water-damaged notebook and did not yet understand what it was. Because that was the moment the Council had been holding the most powerful weapon in known space in its hands and had asked, not whether it was dangerous, not whether it should be banned, not what the tactical implications were. Just what is it? And had not yet known the answer. Humanity had never needed the galaxy to fear them. They had never needed to be the strongest, or the fastest, or the most heavily armed. They had needed only one thing, to be the species that, when you were out of food and your children were sick, and the people who were supposed to protect you hadn't come, showed up at your door with a notebook full of your name. And came back. And kept coming back. Long after every rational civilization would have stopped counting.